Welcome to the Young Sikh Professionals webinar on Understanding India's Farm Bills 2020. The three new Indian farm bills have caused great distress in Punjab, reports of thousands of protesters marching on Delhi, with media coverage across the globe. We know that given many of us have families in Punjab who will be directly affected by these bills, we have a responsibility to provide factual and expert information on these bills to you. We believe by understanding the strengths and weaknesses of these bills in greater depth that we will be able to place to then understand what next steps need to be taken. To help achieve the same, we are delighted to be joined here today by an expert panel of agroeconomists who can help us cut through the noise with critical insight and expert analysis of India's farm bills. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Professor C.S.C. Sekhar, who is a professor at the Institute of Economic Growth and former honorary director of the Agriculture Economics Research Centre, University of Delhi. And also like to introduce Professor Sukhpal Singh, who is professor and former chairperson for the Centre of Management and Agriculture at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad in Gujarat. And he's also former Director General for Centre of Research and Rural Industrial Development, Chandigarh. This panel will be facilitated by Ramneek Singh, who is the current chair and co-founder of the Young Sikh Professional Network. Ramneek is also a trained economist, and over to you.
Morning, Yadvir. Thanks very much for that introduction. Good morning to both our expert guests who've agreed to speak with us today, Professors Sekhar and Singh. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate you coming in and adding expert insight into the issues today. So before we begin this event, I'd like to acknowledge a few things. Firstly, that this is a somewhat unusual event for YSPN to host, considering that our focus is primarily on issues concerning our chapters across Australia and New Zealand. But this has come about because of the interest that our audience and indeed the global Sikh community has shown in this issue, to which we're committed to serving. Secondly, that this is a very divisive issue about a complicated system that is made up of a variety of underlying factors and vested interests that in the coverage to date have not addressed. And this is always going to be a difficult task, and it's exacerbated by the fact that our discussion is limited to only 30 minutes. But what we're hoping to achieve from this event is a fact-based exploration of the issues that rationally analyzes the issues of the reform agenda holistically and provides better options for the diaspora to contribute meaningfully to these issues and address the plight of Sikhs, farmers, and Punjab as a whole. Now, in terms of the structure for the discussion, I'd like to start with setting the context for the reform agenda, beginning with an explanation of the current system, the benefits and problems it has created. Then I'll move on to an understanding of what the legislation says, what it's trying to achieve and why, and then the substance of the farmers' grievances with the reform and what the implications are, particularly to an audience skeptical of capitalist systems and free markets. And then I'd like to close with some suggestions from both of you about what the diaspora can do to help address the situation. So starting with you, perhaps, Professor Singh, as an expert on the Punjabi agricultural system, would you be able to give us a quick overview of the nature of the industry, the size, players, relationships, and output, please, in particular focusing on areas that the current legislation is going to impact?
That's a very good way to begin. Let me tell you that what we are dealing with today is a reform in the registering system of what we know as APMC markets. And if you have to see an APMC market, you need to go to Punjab or Haryana or some other few states, because they have really sort of built it over time. Of course, due to the public support, both from the state government as well as the union government, this APMC, which is I call it the black box of agricultural markets. So that is the central place where agricultural trade takes place, where farmers bring their produce. So it's called Dana Mandi, Anaj Mandi, when you deal with non-perishables. It's called Sabji Mandi, when you deal with fruits and vegetables. So there is a state level act in most agricultural states of India, except 2 or 3. Kerala doesn't have one. Bihar doesn't have it now since 2006, because they repealed instead of amending, unlike many other states. So under that act, the state government is supposed to take care of creating and helping farmers creating infrastructure, helping farmers sell their agriculture produce. So they have a system in place which is regulated. Let me also remind you that as per the Constitution of India, agriculture and agricultural marketing, whatever way it is written there, including what is called agri markets and fairs, is state subject under the Constitution. And that is why we had state level APMC acts passed in the 1960s or early 70s. And that was being used to deal with protecting the farmer from exploitation by the buyer or any intermediary. That was the purpose of bringing Agriculture Produce Market Committee Regulation Act 1961 or whatever. Punjab is 61. So under that, it was specified when a farmer brings the produce, he would not pay any commission to anybody in a regulated market. He or she would pay loading, unloading, cleaning, grading, bagging charges, which are specified in the Act, 5 paisa, 3 paisa per bag or whatever, or per kg. And there is a system of Artiya there, commission agent, which is very important part of the whole story, that there should be facilitation of farmers as sellers and buyers, because on their own, many farmers may not be able to deal with large buyers. They may not be able to understand all the complications of striking a deal. So the Mandi board, the State Agriculture Marketing Board, which oversees all this, whatever 150 plus many other sub-market yards, 150 market yards, which are main yards. Punjab has a APMC almost every taluka level, not district, that's sub-district level. So there, and as per these rules, the APMC, which let me also again say, because not many people talk about these things, but they are not part of the recent debates. Agriculture Produce Market Committee, as the name suggests, is a multi-stakeholder body of elected representatives of different stakeholders. As representatives, as members of the committee who are farmer representatives, trader representatives, commission agent representatives, government representatives, and even cooperative representatives. So each market is managed by a committee as per the rules of the APMC Act. Basically, purpose was to protect the farmer interest, so farmer price discovery happens in a transparent manner. There's an auction system, which we call Boli. Every lot of farmer produce is put to bidding by the traders. There are two types of people there in the mandi who are licensed, Kacha Aadtiya and Pakka Aadtiya. Kacha Aadtiya is basically a commission agent who cannot deal with farmer. He can't buy farmer produce. Pakka Aadtiya is a trader. And some people have both these licenses. And there are 30,000 plus such people in these mandis, 150 main markets and sub-markets. And they have been growing over time. And earlier, those intermediaries basically were from a particular caste community of Punjab, which is Baniyas. Now you also have Jat Sikhs coming into this profession as upgrading of their whatever enterprise or occupation, right? They are not just happy doing only farming. They also wanted to diversify. So many of the Aartiyas are also from the Jat Sikh community now, or non-Baniya caste, you can say. So there is a mix-up now. Earlier it was Jats were doing farming and Baniyas were doing this facilitation of farm produce selling to the state agency like FCI or CCI or private buyers. But for some time, for the last maybe 30 years or so, Punjab's 2.5 major crops, I call it 2.5 because that's what Punjab is left with. So Punjab basically now grows wheat, paddy and cotton. Yeah, and this system of market infrastructure development was also enabled by the fact that Government of India, under its public procurement MSP-based system, was buying very large part, and now almost the whole produce is bought by the FCI in wheat and paddy. And even this last season of COVID, 97% of Punjab farmers got MSP. Yeah, even during this difficult time, 97% could sell to FCI at MSP, which is an achievement. Many other state people don't, even 2% farmers don't get MSP or 5% farmers don't get MSP in many states because FCI doesn't go there. Similarly, in cotton, CCI, Cotton Corporation of India has been participating in these markets in Punjab in APMCs. So over time, what has happened, let me also tell you the other side story, which is also perhaps behind these reforms to some extent. There is this narrative building up in India that farmer is not getting his or her due. That if you see the gap between farmer price and the consumer price, what we call is price spread. That is very high, that a lot of intermediaries are eating up the thing. Farmer doesn't get the remunerative price and consumer ends up paying very high price. And we keep comparing with US and many other countries saying they have only one intermediary or no intermediary. We have 5, 6, 7 or whatever. Because in some states of India, not Punjab, there are local intermediaries where farmer doesn't reach the mandi. Even if APMC mandi is there, regulated mandi is there, farmer doesn't reach there. It's somebody else who aggregates the produce and sells either on behalf of farmer or buys from farmer and sells himself at MSP and makes the money. Yeah, that is how it has been functioning. So there was this narrative around the late 90s when India had taken a step towards economic reform in 1991. That's why you would see today some people calling it the 1991 movement in Indian agriculture, which I completely disagree with. Because before today, India had started undertaking agricultural marketing reforms from 2003 itself with the Model APMC Act, which was enacted and given by the union government to states saying, please amend your state acts like this. That you provide for 3 new channels, because the narrative being built before that was, which was also largely true, saying that these APMCs have become monopoly, single buyer, basically, that they have no other channel for the farmer, because the way APMC used to operate was that they would notify an area, which would be APMC notified area, that block or that district, entire area would be under its jurisdiction, under its regulation, and there will be notified crops. Now, Punjab has 108 or 110 notified crops by the Mandi board, which are monitored by the APMC in terms of handling their transactions. So any first transaction between a farmer seller and a buyer is under the watch of APMC if it is a notified crop in a notified area. The narrative was that earlier nobody could buy from farmers without taking a permission from the APMC committee or Mandi board if he or she was trying to buy outside the Mandi yard. Otherwise, all transactions had to take place under the watch of APMC in the APMC market yard to discover price for the farmer in a fair manner where people could bid on that produce. So in this process, there was this issue of small and marginal farmers and farmers in general not getting adequate credit. So the Artiya or the commission agent has been also, besides facilitating farmer produce selling, where farmer does pay any commission, but the Artiya has been getting commission earlier to 1.5%, then revised to 2% of the price, and then 2.5% now. They have been lending to farmers. It's called interlocking or interlinking of markets, which I'm sure you appreciate because you're an economist. Where the two markets don't function independently of each other. So what the Artiyas do, you'll be surprised also what Punjab is stuck with, which I have been very vocal about and people don't want to talk about anymore, that the FCI will come and purchase from the farmer. But since farmer has lent, Artiya has lent to the farmer, either in cash or kind, either he has given cash credit or he has given seeds or fertilizer or whatever from his own shop or from his uncle's shop or nephew's shop or some friend's shop. On credit. So the FCI, this is a shock actually for many people when I mention this. It happens only in Punjab.
Okay.
And we have not taken note of it. It is shocking. It doesn't even happen in Bihar, which we call so-called backward state or whatever, or any other state, that when the FCI pays for the farmer produce, the payment is made to the Artiya in Artiya's name, not to farmer.
Okay.
This has been going on for the last 50, 60 years. It became an issue about 20 years back. 2 or 3 state governments have come and gone. Nobody has done anything tangible about it because there is a political economy of agriculture markets there. Union government has been very keen. FCA was very keen. Today, I was reading some old clipping. 2010, the FCA wanted to pay directly to farmers. State government said no. Yeah, unions were fighting this battle saying, why? Why are you linking it up something which is informal money lending, which is informal and illegal? Artiyas have no license to do money lending. They are licensed to do facilitation of trade, or if they are pakka Artiya, to buy or deal in agriculture produce by buying from farmers and on selling or whatever.
It sounds to me, I think what you've done is articulate the scope of the market. And I think what you've done really well there is to highlight several problem areas that have emerged off the back of the existing structure of the system. And that to me sounds like the motivation for the reform agenda that has emerged. And so the major problems that you've identified are firstly that Punjab itself has been reduced down to 2.5 crops, as you mentioned. Those 2.5 crops have manifest in severe environmental issues, particularly around the groundwater situation and the reduction of that, which is manifesting in the potential of a humanitarian crisis within a decade. The second part is the interlinking of markets and a regulation around price discovery, which means that the pricing mechanism has been impaired because of, number one, the regulation, as well as the interlinking of markets. And number three...
No, I would not agree on that. Let me rectify this statement. Sure. Because in Punjab, most of the produce is bought by public agencies. So there's no problem price discovery because nobody goes there. MSP, every farmer gets. So Sure. It's not a negative thing. Every farmer actually is assured of MSP because FCI buys it, CCI buys it, or sometimes NAFED buys it. So there's no issue. Price discovery is not an issue because everybody is able to sell at MSP and they're happy. That's why they are so upset because they've been assured. See, in India, problem is not just getting a fair price. Problem is also getting a stable price. Punjab has been one of the biggest beneficiaries of public procurement at assured price. Dana bik jata hai wahan.
So there's different mechanisms for the price discovery to occur. And part of that is the grassroots level at which the Mandi system operates. You mentioned that, that's over hundreds of different sub-districts. And the third problem is the emergence of the lending system, the provision of credit by the Artiyas who are unlicensed. And from what I understand, that manifests in very, very high interest rates, which are exploitative of the farmers. Is that an accurate summary of the current issues that the current system?
Sure, definitely. Very good, very well done. Yeah.
So then from there, if we look at the motivation then behind the act, how do the new acts relate to some of these issues, and what do you think are the impacts on the actual farmer? So if you were to say, look at the average farmer, are they going to benefit from this? Can Can either of you outline, what your views are about how the acts are designed to address these issues, if indeed they are, because there's skepticism as to what the real motivation here is, and I'll talk about that later. But can you two outline what you think the benefits from the acts will be in terms of addressing some of the structural issues with agriculture in Punjab?
My good friend Professor Sukhpal Singh has really outlined excellently the situation in Punjab, and let me take it a little further. I mean, how it relates to the rest of India. In fact, the APMCs, which was started in 1960s under the APMR, Market Regulation Act, not the APMC Act, they have done a wonderful job for quite some time for the first 15, 20 years. Those APMCs, the main function was there are two functions, which is basically to provide infrastructure to farmers, and number two, to ensure fair trade practices in the APMCs. So to ensure these two objectives, to meet these two objectives, what the APMCs did was they also had a licensing authority. So they could give licenses to these RTRs to ensure that only some legitimate operators are there in the market, not the fly-by-night operators. That's the first thing. So the licensing authority was the APMC. Number two, they could charge a fee on the transaction so that they could provide the necessary infrastructure. So over time, what happened is that, except Punjab and Haryana, and also coastal Andhra Pradesh, the mandis really, these APMCs have functioned really well. But in many of the states, what happened was that this licensing authority, which vested with the APMCs, had turned into a sort of a rent-seeking mechanism for the APMCs. So they have started giving licenses to their own kith and kin, and it was a very closely. Number two, because as Supal has rightly pointed out, this APMCs would notify a certain area. So in a state, there were few APMCs and which would have these notified areas, and a trader who is registered in one particular APMC had to seek another license if he wants to trade in another APMC area. So you needed multiple licenses, and also you needed to pay a fee at multiple places. So this created a system of fragmented markets. This was the second issue. So in Punjab, it did not create much of a problem because most of the procurement, as Supal has mentioned, was done by the public agencies. But in other places, actually, the many private players who wanted to invest in agriculture could not enter the market because the APMCs were controlling the licensing. And also, any private investor had to pay for multiple licenses at different places, and also market fee. So in a sense, in what economists call the entry barrier zones. As a result, what happened? Right now, only 6% of the farmers get the benefit of MSP all over India. And nearly only 11% of the value or the output is getting the MSP. So 94% of the farmers are not getting the benefit of MSP. And also only even the produce which is coming into the MSP, a lot of it is being sold at MSP. For example, around 25% of the total output, the estimate suggests that 25% of the output is sold through APMCs and 75% is sold outside. So this is and because of this whole system degenerating into a sort of a collusion between the RTRs, the traders, and the APMC functionaries. So over a period of time, and also the infrastructure started crumbling. Let me also mention that the main function of the APMC of infrastructure provision has also not been carried out satisfactorily. Just to give you one example, the estimates of the standing committee, the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Agriculture as recently as 2019 December, points out that only 15% of the APMCs have weighing facility, which is so crucial for any trade transaction. So if weighing facilities are available only in 15%. So that's the kind of. So with this background, there have been many commissions, there have been many bodies. In fact, even last year, there was a manifesto brought out by the farmers, Freedom for Farmers manifesto, which was brought out by various farmer bodies, intellectuals, and other things. Even that mentions a freedom from APMC is something that they want. So this is the background in which the government, or at least there has been a lot of clamor for reforming the system. In any case, 75% is happening outside the APMC. So why not actually reform and give farmers an option? Right now, although the farmers are selling 75% of the produce is being sold outside APMCs, it is still an illegal activity on paper. So many of the large private players are unwilling or at least reluctant to invest in an activity which is not a de jure activity. It was going on de facto, but not as de jure activity. So now the point is, what the government is trying to do through this is that create an alternative, like Sukhpal has rightly mentioned. There was a monopsony of the APMCs, and they are trying to create one system which is at least creates some kind of semblance of competition to APMC. How it will pan out, how it will work out, will depend on the implementation. So the intent and content seem to be in the right direction to me, but what is lacking is the correct communication and also explaining the uh, basic clauses, what are the problems and what are the shortcomings of this act. That has not been done by the government at all. That's at the root of this whole problem. And then about Punjab and Haryana farmers' concerns, we'll come to it a little later because I have something to say about that.
I agree that there was need to give choices to farmers in terms of channels. But this attempt started in 2003, where, as I mentioned earlier, Union government gave a model APMC Act saying make three things legal. With permission from APMC, of course, that contract farming should be allowed, direct purchase from farmers should be allowed, and private wholesale markets like the APMC, which will be privately owned and managed, should also be allowed. So different states had started amending their acts in line with the model APMC Act. And in 2007, the government of India again came with rules for APMC Act. And 2017, they came out with another model act where they also included livestock produce under this act, but the orientation of the act changed. Earlier it was a regulation. This new act called it facilitation and promotion of agriculture produce and livestock markets, not regulation anymore. And they also took out contract farming from that domain, made a separate act on this, which was also called Agriculture Produce and Livestock Contract Farming and Services Promotion and Facilitation Act 2018. Now, let me give you some data before we get into the details. That before the ordinances came in, the state of affairs in terms of states moving ahead on agriculture market reforms is this. 26 states have already allowed direct purchase. 22 states have already denotified fruits and vegetables from any regulation. This was started by UPA, carried forward by NDA government. They said fruits and vegetables are perishable, should not be subjected to regulation and routing through the APMC and all that. 20 states have e-trading now. 21 states have single license for all the APMCs in that state. 17 states have farmer consumer market yards operational already and allowed. 22 states have contract farming as legal activity. My take on this is that we were almost there in terms of achieving these reforms with the states themselves undertaking it. This ordinance route and at this time, pandemic time, has complicated matters. After it was such a subject, now people are questioning at three levels. One, whether the center should have made a law on this at all. Second, what was the urgency? And third, whether the way it has been done. I have a lot of evidence, the way acts have been framed. I think we need to take that into account.
Yeah, that's fantastic, because I think that's essentially what occurred to me as you were talking then, Professor Sekhar, as well, which is that there's a couple of things that emerged from the discussion. Number one is the emergence of a political economy in addition to the grey market lending that's going on, particularly with the Arthia structure that exists there. And we talked about the licensing, etc. The second thing that emerges as well is the contrast between the state motivation and intent as well as the center. So we talk about it constitutionally as it being a state matter. And so the question is, what is the motivation behind the center introducing the legislation here? Because in effect, basically, Professor Singh, what you talked about there was that 98% of Punjabi farmers get it, whereas only 25% of Indian farmers get it. So there's a conflict between the proportion of people that are benefiting from this versus suffering at the costs of this.
Let's not pose it as a conflict. That would be very, very, I would say, a bad way of looking at this issue. I think that is another point I should have made because I was very good time. Government of India announces minimum support price for 23 crops, plus separately fair and remunerative price for sugarcane. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, for many years and decades now, this is not implemented in terms of backed up by procurement. Only 3-4 crops in each state are under this, where something is procured. FCI doesn't go all over the place where there is marketable surplus. So it's not that Punjab farmers are pitted against some other state farmers. It is that the government of India's agencies are not doing their job adequately in terms of meeting the promise of MSP, which has no meaning if it is not backed up by procurement. I think that has been the main cause of this resentment or whatever. Yeah. That a lot of people feel that what is the point in announcing we are not able to buy at that? Sure. That's the minimum support price. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which introduces the question, right? So, what is the benefit to the farmers then in this context, given the introduction of the flexibility in relation to farmers being able to sell in private markets and discover different pricing? What is the benefit of that relative to the existing structure with the MSP? If Punjabi farmers, for example, are benefiting from an administrative decision, and then they're introducing legislation that is designed to increase flexibility and then to mitigate the effects of the MSP to some extent, what is the basis on which farmers should, accept the new system and structure? Why should they accept this new status quo relative to the existing one, which gives them certainty around pricing?
Given the heterogeneity of India, I don't think the kind of farmers in some other states will be equally agitated about the new laws as the farmers in Punjab and Haryana. Yeah. And Punjab and Haryana farmers are particularly concerned, and they have legitimate concerns, because it is the procurement system is the lifeline there. If you look at the procurement over many years, and particularly in the last 3 years, 88% of their paddy has been procured by the public agencies, and nearly 70% of wheat has been procured through public procurement. Whereas in other states, for example, if you take paddy itself, there are other major states like Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Odisha. There, the procurement is less than 44%, which is less than half of what is being procured in Punjab. That means the entire production of Punjab is being picked up by procurement agencies, as Sukhpal has already mentioned. The same is the case in wheat. It is even more. In wheat, 70% of the production in Punjab has been picked up in the last 2-3 years by the procurement agencies. Whereas in the other major states of MP and UP, it is less than 25%. It's 23%. So the farmers in Punjab and Haryana, for farmers of Punjab and Haryana, it's the lifeline. So any disruption to this lifeline, whether perceived or real, is going to make them agitated. That's what they are getting agitated by. But my point is that the government has failed miserably in communicating this to the farmers, that if the farmers need this procurement system, government needs it even more. Why? Because government is actually operating a huge mammoth public distribution system in India. So there are 80 crore beneficiaries under National Food Security Act. And National Food Security Act, unlike MSP, is a rights-based and a legal entitlement. Anyone can drag the government to the court, whether they will be able to get it or not, but it's a legal right. So it's a right-based entitlement. So government is obligated to give food to people under an NFSA. And just let me quote some figures. In the last few years, government has procured more than 40% of paddy for PDS and 32% of wheat, which translates into nearly 45 million tons of paddy and 35 million tons of wheat. Okay. And this was the level of procurement. Now, if government wants to disband this procurement system and go to the private market to get this quantum of grains, will they be able to get it? Immediately, the prices will skyrocket. Number two, with the recent amendment in the Essential Commodities Act, the private sector can also actually start hoarding. This is another problem. So government has no option but to actually continue this procurement system. And they also cannot go to the international market because this quantum of grain is not available anywhere. And to add to the problem, actually, because of the COVID, government has earmarked a lot more grain for the public distribution system this year, which is almost 50% of paddy they have earmarked for public procurement and public distribution. Under these circumstances, government has no option but to actually continue this procurement system. If not in the interest of farmers, at least in the interest of the government itself to continue the procurement, PDS and NFSA, they'll have to continue. So I think the government has done a terrible job of communicating the basic compulsion of the government to continue this procurement system. And I think Sukhpal will have a lot more to add because he's an expert on Punjab. But my hunch is that the governments are mainly worried that this MSP and procurement system might be done away with if these new laws are put in place. Which is not the case. Government needs it. Government is desperately needs it. That's it.
There is a concern which comes from the context of these reforms. Let me just add to what Shekhar has said. One is that there has been some policy steps in the past. There was this committee called Shanta Kumar Committee Report, which recommended that we are procuring too much, we are distributing too much to poor. We should cut down on it. We can't afford to have such a system being run at such a high cost, with FCI being involved in that. And then there is the CICP, Commission for Agriculture Costs and Prices, which is the Government of India body, which recommends MSPs for different crops every season, it has mentioned in its past reports last few years, saying open-ended procurement should not be continued anymore. Punjab is the beneficiary of open-ended procurement, where they say every grain will be bought. So that is causing concern. Third is that they also sort of set the cat among the pigeons by mentioning in one of the reports that in order to instill confidence among farmers about procurement systems, maybe MSP can be made a legal right. So there are these things which are there in government documents, which are making farmers worried now that, okay, this is fine, but that the government policy orientation suggests this kind of thing. These are all policy documents, not necessarily accepted, but this is what people read. Punjab's farmer union leaders are very smart. So they say that now when you are creating an unequal playing field between APMC Mandi, which has been the hub of public procurement, and the private new trade area where private people can just come and buy with a PAN card, it's possible that in order to cut down its cost of buying, even FCI may move out of APMC Mandi purchase to new trade area purchase. And it may not buy as much as it's buying earlier because it wants to cut down on its cost of procurement and volume procured. Cost of procurement is the highest in Punjab, 8.5%. 6% is taken by the government of Punjab as mandi fees and rural development cess, and 2.5% by the Artiya. So, and that Haryana, it's about 6.5%. Some other states just 2 or 3%. So that is also a concern that government of India has been saying, why should we pay this additional money? For the first time this season, let me inform all of you, CCI has bought cotton directly from farmers without paying to commission agents. They have succeeded finally after the coming into play of these new acts. Earlier, they couldn't do it. This time, they have been able to displace the Artiya from the system. They say, we don't need you. And let me tell you, there are states in India like Madhya Pradesh, which abolished the very institution of Artiya in 1980s itself. There are no Artiyas in those mandis. The government and private buyer directly buy from farmers. So it's possible to directly engage with farmers in these mandis or outside without having somebody who is overloading the system with unnecessary costs. But that is what has been one of the major reasons that there has been this so-called tension between Punjab and the central agencies in terms of how much and how they should buy or not buy from Punjab.
In fact, government of Punjab, because of this high market fee and also because a lot of procurement happens in Punjab, so they have been able to earn a lot of revenue. Some estimates suggest that Punjab will stand to lose nearly 3,500 to 4,000 crores in terms of revenue if this system is done away with. So the stakeholders are not only the farmers of Punjab and Haryana, but also the government of Punjab, which is basically has been earning a lot of revenue through this system.
And the Artiyas. And the Artiyas. People who are upset. Yeah, government of Punjab, Artiya, and the farmer. There are three stakeholders who are upset. Yeah.
That kind of touches on the political economy piece that we talked about at the beginning, which is the vested interests that are brought into maintaining the current status quo. And I think Professor Sekhar, you did a good job of outlining the reality of what will happen with the MSP in the future, given that India's food distribution program needs to continue and the sustainability of that program.
MSP will continue. Farmer may keep getting MSP, but the Artiya may not get the commission. That is the reality of future.
Okay. What I wanted to talk about next was, the majority of the opposition to the material that I've seen from the new legislation is that this is effectively a covertly opportunistic attempt by corporate interests to monopolize the purchase and distribution of agricultural produce. And so that's manifest primarily because people have seen the implementation of some of these programs in other states in India and have seen the impacts of that through, procurement of land, agricultural land, and then indentured servitude from the people that live there. What are your views and responses to comments about that? What does the evidence show from the implementation of these programs in India? And what do you think are the realities around the situation?
What is being attempted in these central laws is not something new. So contract farming, which is the big corporate part of it, right? Of course, we should all appreciate, and a lot of actually farmers and farmers unions don't understand this, that when we say contract farming, it is not about corporate farming. And these two are entirely different concepts and practices. So contract farming has been in this country around for 60 years now, starting with seed contract farming, where state agencies, national companies, multinational companies have been undertaking contract farming across the country in different states. And Punjab was pioneer in bringing contract farming to perishable crops by bringing Pepsi into Punjab. When multinationals not being allowed, actually, Punjab lobbied for it. So Punjab has been doing contract farming. And Punjab also came out with a separate law on contract farming in 2013 itself, which was never operationalized, unfortunately. and it was not needed also. I had written against it at that time. So the issue is, one is that new channels are needed for farmers, and every corporate intervention is not bad. Many corporates are buying in APMC mandis. Do we throw them out? Do we want only state to buy everything? So corporate intervention is required in the modern time because markets are opening up. Corporates know the markets. They have the technology. They have the business system. They can deliver the goods, provided we have adequate monitoring and regulatory mechanisms in place. So I have been arguing for this in contract farming also. The way contract farming is practiced on the ground leaves a lot to be desired for the farmer to benefit. But who bothers about? No state government is really concerned about looking at which company is doing contract farming, how many farmers in how many acres, under what terms and conditions, despite the fact that each APMC Act had even a model contract farming agreement telling the state which aspect should be written into a contract. That contract has to be vetted by the State Agricultural Marketing Board, then only practiced on the ground. But the kind of contract agreements are seen on the ground, one gets shocked. Companies even saying, okay, you can produce for me, but if you get a better price, sell outside. How can a contract allow somebody to sell outside if you're asking that farmer to produce for yourself? That means there's something else. You are not interested in the produce, you are interested in something else. That kind of contract farming also has happened in this country. Direct purchase, another channel which is being talked about now. All the food supermarkets in India have been practicing direct purchase by taking permission from agency for the last 20 years, if not more. So all the channels have been with us, nothing new. Corporates are with us. They are very much part of the Indian markets. I don't know what is the worry about, unless there is a misunderstanding about some of these concepts and also some terminology used in the agreement acts which raises doubts. I can talk about that later on, maybe when we come to the actual crux of the thing. There are issues there as well. Yeah.
Well, the question I think that comes to mind off the back of what you've said there is, what are the protections for farmers? You've outlined how there are contrasts and divergences between the nature of the contracts. What are the nature of the protections for farmers in there that will ensure that contract farming is held to an acceptable standard? From what we understand, the dispute resolution procedures with farmers now has also been modified so that they have to deal with bureaucratic administrators rather than court systems. So what can you talk a bit more about how farmers are going to be protected under these new regulations?
I'll quickly make one or 2 points. Basically, your point about the concerns regarding corporate takeover or something. In the popular press and the media, what we see is that the corporates are going to take over the land of the farmers. Okay, that's the first concern that many political parties and on the streets that's being. It is completely absurd to me because in the act, if you see the language, it's completely forbids any transaction linking land to the contract or sale transaction. So land is out of question. But I'm more concerned about the level playing field because small farmer will always have a disadvantage vis-a-vis a large player. So there has to be some kind of a regulatory mechanism, not an Inspector Raj kind of a things that we had in 70s or 80s. But some kind of a regulatory mechanism needs to be put in place. There is no privatization without regulation is disastrous. It has not worked in any country.
I completely agree with Shekhar's point that small and marginal farmer, which should be our concern in any policy or regulation, because they are 85% of the total operators of farms in India. And generally people ask me, what is the profile of an Indian farmer? I generally say he owns or operates 2.5 acres. Half of it is dry. He suffers from serious levels of production risk and also market risk. He doesn't get credit. He gets credit very high rate. It's interlocked. He doesn't get crop insurance most of the time. And when he comes to market after all that hard effort, he's not able to get a good price for his produce. So he's ruined. So if that is the kind of farmer we are talking about, there has been complete exclusion of this kind of farmer from contract farming arrangements in India for the last whatever number of years it's been going on across states, across crops, across regions. So they are not part of new channel. Similar case with supermarkets. Most of them procure from relatively large. They may be still small, but relatively large and resourceful farmers. So unless we have some policy incentives or regulation to make these new channels take these farmers into their fold or become more inclusive, we are not going to see very many benefits from this. Now let me come to some of the problems of these two acts. How can you allow anybody and everybody simply because he or she has a PAN card, which is an income tax identity card in India? Have we become that casual about working with farmers? I use this term, I can use it, I'm not worried about this. Every Tom, Dick and Harry cannot be allowed to deal with farmers' produce. And that's what has been allowed. I think we should have been more careful on that, because there is an issue of counterparty risk coverage. Somebody just shows me the PAN card, takes my 6 quintals of mustard or whatever, and runs away. Where do I go? I don't even know the guy. I have no shop name, nothing. I don't know from where he came. Now in the APMC, we have a system where these licensed guys have to give counterparty guarantees. There's a Mandi Samiti which can take action against any artiya or trader doing golmaal with the farmer. That is not there in this. Second, and I will not talk about the first part. Now let me talk the Contract Farming Act, which is even more problematic. It links any bonus or premium payment to the farmer other than the basic agreed price to the APMC price. You said APMC are monopolistic, monopsonistic, they exploit, they don't discover price as well. Now you want to benchmark contract price again with the Mandi. What does it speak of the credibility of the act? You have been sort of criticizing it left, right, and center. Now you don't please look at that price to pay me, or company should look at that price to pay the farmer. So I think that is completely undesirable linkage, should not have been there. Then for the first time, I've soiled my hands with contract farming studies for the last 30 years. I know how many contracts I've analyzed, content analysis and whatnot, and so on, other than field study. For the first time, it makes a sharecropper responsible for contract production. It says if there is a sharecropper who is part of the contract, he should be responsible for receiving inputs and using them well. Generally, sharecroppers are never part of any contract farming, is generally with the owner farmer. So how can you, sharecropper just like a worker, you can say part worker. How can you make a worker a part of the contract arrangement? Then there is the issue of course, this definition of production contract. It says if the farmer has provided any services to the sponsor, contracting company called sponsor, then the sponsor would pay the farmer for that. Generally, it's the other way around. The company provides services, inputs and extension and whatnot to the farmer. Farmer pays for it. So it raises doubts that what is being talked about. And one state in India, let me tell you, going by this wrong definition of contract farming, production agreement, has actually enacted their alternative legislation, which recognizes that contracting companies can do farming on farmers' land, which is nowhere in the world, nowhere in knowledge system you can justify leasing of land under contract arrangement. In contract farming, farmer is a must as a party who will do farming for the company. So we are doing this kind of shoddy, I'm sorry to use this term, shoddy lawmaking, because we are not even understanding what we are putting there. So that should not have been done. Then there is, of course, arrears. There's not, which unions are very particular about. I agree. I have been defending it, saying farmers' land is not under threat at all. As Shekhar said, it's completely written there in so many words, saying contracting company or sponsor cannot lease, cannot transfer, cannot mortgage, cannot sell farmers' land. The contract is only for the crop. But there's one clause in the dispute resolution mechanism which says if you have to recover any payments from the farmer he has defaulted, then you can recover its arrears of land revenue. That is creating a lot of trouble. Some of the farmer union leaders are very smart. They're saying, no, this means our lands will be taken, auctioned by the company to recover money. So we don't want this there. So basically, I think what I just want to make a larger statement about it. I think it is not fair to expect a regulatory tool to deliver what is the job of a policy. We are trying to do that here, which is not going to happen. Thank you.
We've covered off a very, very complicated topic. And I think what occurs to me is that there are lots and lots of moving pieces in relation to this legislation. And it sounds like there's somewhat misperceptions around several pieces of what's going on. There are obviously legitimate problems in the existing structure and infrastructure of the system. And then also it sounds like there are some potential issues in the design of the new policy in terms of using regulatory instruments instead of using policy in order to implement some of these changes. And also it seems as though that the government, through its own style, has done a poor job of communicating what is and isn't actually going to happen. I might round out this discussion just before we move on to the last piece about what we can do. I want to ask you guys, what is your opinion? Like, who benefits most from this? And what do you think happens to the average farmer, both today and in 5 to 10 years' time off the back of this? Do you think that they will benefit? Will they be worse off? And more broadly as well, what about the procurement program in India, how it has to procure for poor people to eat? What are the impacts going to be both at that local farmer level and at the broader state and national level? If you can talk about that, Professor Sekar.
Let me mention it right at the outset. This is a step in the right direction, because in all the reforms in the past, or all the policy initiatives that have been taken, factor markets, the input markets, they have been touched upon, but the output markets were largely left untouched by Indian government. for a long time now. Although some state governments on their own have done something, but so this is a step in the right direction. But the implementation is the key. This is not a panacea to all the problems. Like Supal has mentioned, there are many things that need to be done to complement these things. One, like the farmers are tied to these RTRs because of their credit needs. Okay, most of the credit needs are on account of consumption. A farmer wants to perform the marriage of his daughter, there are health exigencies and so on and so forth. So for which he cannot borrow from a bank or some institutional source. So he falls back upon these guys who lend him credit. And in turn, he gets locked to, because even if he gets a better price somewhere because of these new laws, he will not be able to sell because he is obligated to this guy who is commission agent or anything. So what is the solution? The solution is to actually give him more credit, and also particularly credit for consumption. For production, farming, there is still some credit available for consumption, meeting the consumption needs. Many farmers, small farmers particularly, do not have. That's the first thing. Okay, somehow that needs to be addressed. Number two, like who will benefit this? This depends on how these are implemented. Like Sukhpal has rightly said, if you really take care of the provisions, make the necessary amendments, like he has pointed out, many flaws in the way this legislation has been drafted and has been worded. So these things have to be really thought through. Amendments should be made to that. And also the government should be a little more careful in reaching out to farmers and also to the states, and also firming up these major clauses that have major bearing on the farmers. So implementation is the key. They have to have a regulatory mechanism in place. And I personally feel regulatory mechanism is also very important for another purpose, which is just 2 or 3 years down the line, if we want to know how this system has worked, we need some data. What transactions have taken place in the trade area, how much has been sold, at what price, how many farmers benefited from that. If we don't have a data collection mechanism of the transactions happening outside APMC mandis, now at least we know APMC mandis have not worked as they should have because we have some data on that. But we will not know, it will be a black box. So they have to have a regulatory commission, which can also have some kind of a data collection function built into it. So these are some of the things that is very important to take these reforms forward. Ultimately, implementation is the key in the right spirit. And states have to be taken on board, because ultimately the implementation is with the states. Center, with all its intentions and its force, it cannot actually carry through these reforms through.
I agree with Professor Shekhar that yes, that is the ultimate proof of any regulatory or policy mechanism in terms of making an impact. But if the design itself is faulty, you can't expect the implementers to correct that. So we need to attend to that first, and then who benefits. I think any farmer in India, and there are many of them, actually majority of them are in that situation, who never tasted MSP. He may, I'm just saying, possibility that because the new channels, he may get a little better price, may not be MSP, maybe lower than MSP, maybe higher than MSP, but some distance possibilities there that somebody may reach him to buy or reach her to buy her produce. That is one. But we also need to look at what has been the experience before us so far. Bihar, which not only let the APMC function, like the new acts allow the APMC to continue, which dismantle the APMC by repealing the APMC Act altogether, one has not seen great improvement. We have heard stories of Bihar and UP rice paddy going to Punjab this time to sell at MSP because they were not even getting 50% of that. So simply by legislating and saying that or opening up markets does not mean farmers will benefit. You need to put other things in place. I'm very happy that Professor Shekhar also highlighted that. I say solution for farmers' problems, even marketing solutions, lie outside markets. For example, credit. Unless the farmer is provided reasonably priced, good amount of credit, he can't get out of the interlocked market transactions. And unless he gets out, he just can't exercise choice. So important thing in this whole story of policy and regulation is to reduce farmers' production risk. Our Fasal Bima Yojana is not working, going beyond 30%. Now government has made it voluntary, unfortunately. Now even whatever farmers are getting by default will not get it now. So production risk is very high, and to top it having market risk. And now if farmers were part of the MSP regime, they will be exposed to some more market risk. But some of them may also get a benefit of a new channel. So that's what the story would be as the impact of these new legislations.
To summarize, I think it sounds like the consensus that has emerged is that it's a step in the right direction. They are trying to do the right things. The intent is correct. However, the design is somewhat flawed. The problems actually stem from the unavailability of institutional credit for purposes of consumption and inputs, and also the production risks, and now the addition of a market risk. So we've actually overloaded farmers with an additional set of risks, not really solve the actual problem that they have, which is the availability of credit and the interlocking loans that they already have. Which is a design flaw in the existing policy, and then it's been implemented poorly because of a lack of communication around the issues.
I want to add one small point.
Sure.
Actually, they need to continue APMC system in later spirit, because you cannot replace the monopsony of APMC with the monopsony of private trade. So they have created they're planning to create some kind of a structure which can provide some competition.
You said it, Professor Shekhar has said it.
So it's very important. Okay? So they must do it. They should mean what they are saying. They should walk the talk. Yeah.
Very good.
Sure. No, that's a fantastic point. I completely agree. You're replacing one problem with a different problem that doesn't really solve the actual problem. So to quickly round out the discussion, as you guys probably will have all seen, there is a lot of concern amongst the diaspora in relation to the issues. Now, naturally, people in other parts of the world are concerned about families in Punjab and other parts of India who are going to be impacted by these regulations. What are some meaningful interventions or things that we can do in order to address some of these problems? There are obviously things we can do in terms of donating to humanitarian organizations like Khalsa Aid, but the two of you as experts in relation to this problem, are there other more meaningful things that we can do to help in improving the design of some of these policies, or even in making noise in relation to what the actual problems are? Do you have any thoughts on that before we close off the discussion?
I think the best thing that you guys can do is to communicate the essence of these things. And also, one of the most important things that needs to be understood here is that the concerns of Punjab and Haryana are legitimate. Having served the country in attaining food security in a short span of time, Punjab and Haryana have done a remarkable service. I mean, no one can deny that. At the same time, a large number of farmers, like Sukhpal has rightly said, have not even seen what an MSP is. I mean, they don't even know what an MSP is. They only have heard about it. They have not. So that has not worked for them. So the government, or at least the government, is claiming to create an alternative system, so which may or may not work. So let's not throw the baby with the bathwater. So let's let this system, but we have to keep an eye on how this is implemented, and like so many flaws that have been pointed out by Professor Sukhpal, I think those need to be ironed out. The design needs to be perfected, or at least improved upon, and the implementation needs to be taken care of. But let's not be overly concerned about this. This is not about, like Sukhpal has very rightly said, this is not about Punjab and Haryana versus rest of India. No, that's not the thing. Everyone understands the kind of contribution Punjab and Haryana have made, and they respect that, and they want that system to continue. And the government also needs that system to continue. Only thing is, we have to take care to ensure, through our civil society pressure and other things, that government does not abandon this APMC system and create a sort of a monopsony of the private trade. That's something that we should be wary of. And you keep actually educating the community and also the Punjabi, the diaspora. That will be a great service. In fact, I'll be always more than willing to engage or come online anytime, because this is a very important issue. All of us should be concerned. Because farmers, these fears need to be allayed. And also, in that, all of us have a role to play. Yeah.
I would say that what you're doing is the much needed thing, that making concerned people across the globe aware with information and analysis is as important as those who are trying to work with the government to resolve this issue. But also, I think, let me say, it's quite late already for Punjab to get out of this MSP culture. I think it's not doing any good to Punjab. I have been saying Punjab is stuck with the low-level equilibrium of growing wheat, paddy, and getting MSP. That is not what Punjabi farmer should be about. Yeah, so I think Punjab is cutting its own feet by getting stuck with wheat and paddy. It should get out of it as soon as possible. Neighboring Haryana is showing some way forward, but I think both states need to now say that we have had enough of it. It is not doing any good now. Just for a few thousand rupees per quintal, you are compromising larger issues of social and environmental sustainability. I keep telling Punjab farmers, why are you happy growing 2 crops? You should be taking 5 crops just to provoke them. You should be taking 5 high value crops. And you should not be just happy being a farmer who can do wonders on the farm. Please step out of the farm. Money is not in the farm. The sooner they realize better, they should also try to get into the market, put one foot in the market, directly or indirectly. Money is there. Money is not in production. Production is a dirty job. Get smart, get into the market, take charge of things and claim your share. Don't beg.
Appreciate it. Just a quick follow-up on that question, Professor Singh. How can we, as the diaspora, help to encourage farmers that are involved in production to take a more forward-leaning step into taking control of
It's
markets?
a very good question. I'm happy you asked me to. See, what you need there is cultural reorientation. I do it at my level. I address farmers groups. I address a lot of civil society groups there. They should realize now that, see, there's a cultural problem saying, baniyagiri nahi karenge. That is not a good thing to simply they say, I'm going to market and selling. There is a baniyagiri is a negative thing. खेत में जो मर्जी करवा लो, बाहर जाने को, बेचने को मत कहो. टोकरी सब्जी के लेके जाने को मत कहो. I've interacted with young farmers. They say, when we go to the vegetable market, they buy at 2 rupees a kg. Within 3 minutes, when it exchanges hands, it will become 20 rupees a kg. I said, then are you not foolish? Why are you giving it to somebody else when you know it's going to be 18 rupees higher after 3 minutes? Why can't you sit there and retail it? No, that is not our culture. I think that is going to become a very big problem for farmers. I encountered some other farmers in Amritsar a few months back. I was talking about what is wrong with Punjab agriculture and how we should mind our own business, not look to the center every time. He said, you seem to be having some meaning in your talk. Can you explain? I said, please get up. I said, please tell me when you, it is good that you gave me this time. I want to raise another point, which is very important for Punjabi community. I said, do you take your produce home after harvesting? He said, no. I said, do you grade it? He said, no. I said, do you dry it? He said, no. I said, do you clean it? He said, no. I said, do you bag it? He said, no. Then I said, you take all your dirt, I'm sorry to use the term, and put it in on the head of Mandi board in the APMC. They have to put dryers, cleaners, graders, and whatnot. That is not marketing. That is not even farming. If you produce something by working hard for 3 or 6 months, you must make every effort to enhance its value. The खरीदने वाला कहे, मुझे तो यही bag लेना है. But unfortunately, they are not into that. Other part I want to, which is very important, because when you talk of, in India, generally there is a problem. When you talk of agriculture, you talk only of farmers. And when somebody questions you further, you talk only of small farmers. But the other real hero and shero of agriculture in India, especially in states like Punjab, whatever is going on there, farm workers. And most of them are women today. Unless we recognize them, we train them, we orient. Please note that Punjab has almost no farm employment left after mechanization of paddy harvesting, wheat sowing, wheat harvesting. Now Punjab is planning to bring mechanical cotton harvesters costing more than 1 crore each. And there is a Punjab labor which comes to Gujarat to pick cotton. They stay in the fields under tents with their families, lock, stock and barrel. So Punjab's agriculture development also has to be pro-small farmer and pro-worker. It has to be inclusive. Punjab's agenda of agriculture development has been hijacked by some vested interests. I don't want to name them now. That needs to be set right. The diaspora may not know another fact of life that I want to give you. Sure. In India, Shekhar may correct me if I'm wrong, 85% farmers operate small or marginal farm, which means operating less than 5 acres or 2 hectares. Yeah. And 2/3 of them are actually less than 1 hectare. In Punjab, the ground reality, which many of you may also not know because you are from Australia, which has average size of 2,250 hectares in Australia. Yeah. India's average is 1.1 hectare, 2.5 acres. In Punjab, is 33% farmers who can be called small or marginal operators operate just 8% land. 8 single digit. Punjab's policies have thrown small and marginal farmers out of farming practically. And I only have concern for small and marginal farmers and workers. And I'm not happy that Punjab is doing its farming and farming policy and management.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. I think it's an excellent insight into the possibilities of where we can go in the future and helping small and marginal farmers to improve their economic security. Both of you have given fantastic insights. We are very appreciative of your time. Thank you so much for your comments and helping to illustrate and detail the issues for which we're all concerned about. I'm going to hand back to Yadvir to help close out the event. Thank you both.
Well, I'd like to thank both Professor Sekhar and Professor Singh for joining us today. This has been a fantastic discussion. We really delved into the issues about where farming has a structural problem existing right now in Punjab and other states as well, the difference in farming in Punjab and other places of India, and where the improvements could be made in the current legislation that's there, but also where there's some faults or some need to actually improve legislation, and importantly, communicate where the benefits are. It's clear that there needs to be change to farming practices in India, and particularly Punjab, where they're very reliant on the minimum service price, which locks them into low prices for a couple of crops, and also locks them into a system with these other vendors and capital systems that need to be freed up. So it seems there's quite a lot of social issues there that we need to address, and quite a lot of economic issues as well. And if farmers, particularly in Punjab, wish to elevate their means, their status, their family beyond what there is now, there's a need to go beyond simple farming and pulling something to the ground to marketing and distribution, to be part of the retail chain. Because each time that you take something, a product from your manufacturing, and you leave a little bit to someone else to do before it gets to the final sell price, you're giving away a margin. And that's a profit that you should be taking yourself. And we can see, for example, the Professor Singh said that farmers might sell a crop for $2, but literally within a minute, someone else sells the same crop for 20 rupees. So that's a very easy thing for someone to actually do themselves, that last mile, that last minute. So I greatly appreciate both professors for joining us today. This has been a very insightful discussion, and I hope that people listening have learned something new that they haven't got from Instagram or from the other cable news networks that have provided the information. I hope that it encourages discussion amongst your family of what the next step should be, and really give you better insight into that. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for
interacting with both of you. And of course, Shekhar, as a colleague. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Okay. Have a good day.